This program is brought to you in part by SalCal Real Estate Connections. Yes, good evening. As we are about to embark on introducing a new TV show that we're going to be covering, and believe me, the subject matter in this show is something special. We're going to talk about UFO activity. We're going to talk about aeronautical things that have gone on in the past, and we are very fortunate to have and very honored to have guest hosts with us. Will be Rick Teles, who is the author of a beautiful book that you need to read to really understand what is going on in this activity. The Final Revelation, the Sun Project. What Rick, I'm telling you, when I started reading that book, I could not put it down.
Good.
You know, and I'm going to let Rick give you a little background of what his involvement was with this UFO activity and different things that have gone on in the past. Rick, tell me something about these activities.
Well, Larry, I've been involved with I call myself a student of the UFO phenomenon for about 50 years now. Mm-hmm. I kind of caught on with me when I was a little kid and it stuck with me. But it really started to, I started to see more things as I got older. I worked with different investigative groups. I've worked with MUFON, I've worked with NICAP, probably done 300 or 400 investigations. And on different types of UFO situations, incidents, even abduction situations. But it was really later on that I started to get into some of the more, what I'm calling the heavy stuff that we wrote about in the book. My background is a technical background. I'm a cybersecurity specialist, cyber warfare. For people who know about that, I work with things like intrusion detection and data authentication and authentication. And in doing that, I had an opportunity to work with a group, and we worked with the U.S. government, aerospace industries, mm-hmm. Groups like the Air Force, where I met a lot of people, very high-level, high-ranking people in both the intelligence and the military establishment that I got to know over 10, 12 years. And finally, in regards to the book, what they said is that they had been seeing information about, people talk about UFOs, extraterrestrials, and that type of thing. And they said, some people are kind of close to the truth. Now, these are very high-ranking people, and we can talk about them later. And they said, some people are very close to the truth. He goes, but some people, they're telling stories out there to the public that aren't exactly right. So you know what? We want to tell our side of the story as military intelligence people, and you're going to write it. And I said, oh, great. Thank you very much for that. But that's okay because I studied the topic. So then we put the book together. And what the book is about, it's about these military and intelligence officers, again, high-ranking, who had access to information probably about the most closely guarded secret in the history of mankind. And we've talked about this before. Some of the things that we're going to talk about in this series is going to be difficult for people to accept. And I understand that. Some of it was difficult for me to accept. And I know we had this conversation where I said, for 50 years I did this, I did it as a kid, I've read everything, I've done investigations. But when these men of such credibility sat there and started to tell me certain things, my first response was, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
And they say, no, we're not.
Could it happen?
Could it really happen? And I know it's going to be difficult for some people. And like we talked about, some people just say, these guys are crazy, this is all fantasy. And that's okay too. But whatever you believe, that's not going to change reality. All right? What these men said was, we're going to tell you our side of the story. Whether people believe us or not, we don't care. We're telling you what we know to be truth. So the question is, for all the viewers and for you, do you really want to know the truth? Because I'm going to tell you the truth as it was told to me and as we know it. Now, I believe these men because of who they are, and we can talk about that later. But that's going to be the question as we go through some of this information.
Well, very good. It sounds like your background is going to be right up our alley. And boy, I'll tell you, I am excited. That I'll tell you. And the other thing, we're going to have guest Steve Parker, who is a radio show icon and a UFO enthusiast, I like to call him.
Yep.
And Rick, you know him first class too, right?
I know Steve well. I've been on his radio show a number of times. And Steve is fascinated with all this. He's always coming up with the good questions. So it's going to be fun to have Steve on with us as well.
Oh, absolutely. You know, a lot of people don't realize that Steve, they've called him over the years, they had nicknames. They call him Spark, you know.
Yeah.
I call him Spocky. Hey, you know, I've been teasing him. I said, we're going to get you a set of ears. You know what I mean? And he, of course, you know, he just loves to be right in the middle of the action. Let me tell you.
And he'll call me and say, Rick, did you hear this? Yeah, Steve, I heard about that. Oh, tell me about it. Tell me about it. And we'll go through it for a few minutes. And but you know, we talked about the problem with this topic. And some people can say, oh, it's a silly topic. It's a kind of a fantasy topic. And we know 99.9% of everything people see in the skies is nothing. It's a natural event.
It can be explained.
It's a misidentification. But when you really get into this topic and you get into it the right way, and I think we're going to do that, is we're going to explain the stories, some of the stories you've heard. We're going to talk about what's real, what's not. But we're also going to throw in some science of today, what we as humankind are doing today, and how it parallels some of these stories. And you said it before, if we can do it, is it possible that somebody else could have already done
absolutely.
this? We couldn't have been the first ones to think about this.
You know, when you think about what we do today to explore the universe, I mean, are we the only ones that are ever going to do it? And we send drones and we send robots. Is this possible that somebody had done the same? And we know, absolutely.
And possibly they're more sophisticated than we are, so their machines are more sophisticated, just like we're getting more sophisticated. And again, we talked about it. According to the Kepler project, and that's NASA's project, all right, so we're talking about NASA. According to Kepler, there's 40 billion planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone that could harbor life, like life we have here on Earth. Okay, and that's 40 billion. And the Milky Way galaxy is kind of a small to moderate sized galaxy. But then Kepler also suggests that there are over 220 million galaxies. I'm not going to do the math. 220 million times, let's just say 40 billion planets.
Wow.
Somewhere out there, there's got to be something else. And I think most people of science agree that now. So the argument right away gets into, well, could they have gotten here? Could they have found us? And of course, we can talk about that. The answer is, of course, they could. They could do the same thing.
Absolutely. When you look at NASA alone, the things that with the moon, I mean, there's people today that still don't believe we went there.
Right. Well, they're going to do the same thing we did, possibly. They're going to send stuff out there and hope to get lucky.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's just possible that maybe, you know, people say, well, okay, let's say they are out there. How could they get here? How could they cross those distances of space? Maybe it's just possible that somebody knows more about the universe than we do.
Absolutely.
Because after all, we have made many, many mistakes, and every day, NASA will say it. I've talked to people from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and they say every day we learn something new that we thought couldn't be.
Oh, absolutely. When you look at the history with Tesla, and
Tesla's a good example.
That he was talking about harnessing the energy from the universe, from our atmosphere.
Electromagnetic fields and waves.
And it was then, and now we're talking about in today's technology.
And we know we can do that through the HARP project. Now, some people will say, oh, the HARP project, is that a story? No, it's not. It's a very real project. You can go online, put in HARP patent, HAARP, High Altitude Auroral Research Project. Put in that. You'll get the patent number. You can go and read the patent from the patent office. Yep. It'll tell you what it did. But, you know, it was just not that long ago, and when we were in school, remember, we were taught about photosynthesis. No life can exist without photosynthesis.
Oh, yeah.
Then we learned something new. Oh, wait a minute, we were wrong. Chemosynthesis, all that stuff at the bottom of the ocean, they survive through chemical synthesis through the vents. So that can't be. Oh, bumblebees can't fly according to aerodynamics. And then I like the most recent one, is anybody who's into math, they knew that prime numbers, according to our mathematic theory, prime numbers would always be random. Well, researchers at Stanford found that prime numbers are not always random. So now our mathematics might not be perfect. We don't know everything. And I think that that's part of the problem, is that our science and our math are based on things called axioms or brute facts. And those are facts that can't be proven or disproven. Okay? We just seem to know that they're true. And we've talked about that. And one thing is that a hydrogen atom has one electron. And ask any physicist, why does a hydrogen atom have one electron? And his answer is, I don't know, it does. Okay?
What it is,
It's an axiom. So my argument there is our science isn't mature enough, possibly, to understand this broad universe, which is so much bigger than we can even imagine. So if we can't say what is, how can we say what isn't?
Absolutely.
So that's where I think as we start to get into this discussion, we're going to talk a little bit and we're going to say, well, you know what? All I can say today is that this might not exist based on science as we know it. And our science, our physics may not apply elsewhere in the universe.
That's absolutely.
And I think
correct.
most scientists will agree with that at this point.
Absolutely. And the other, you know, I also wanted to let people know that myself, my background, and most viewers and friends always relate me to motorsport events or vintage cars and this and that. But in reality, at a very young age, I was so excited about UFO and aeronautical experiences. I tell you, it's like I'm a UFO enthusiast at heart, and this show it really got me excited, without a doubt.
Well, you know, how many of us grew up through the 60s with the space program and remember, you know, the Mercury project and the Apollo project, the Gemini, and you know, I was on every part of that. I was following. And,
oh, absolutely! I've worked on projects. I've worked on, and Steve, Rick, you're gonna laugh about this. I've worked on Star Wars projects from Reagan.
And you know, it's interesting you should say that because people all thought when he said Star Wars, there's a whole lot more to that than people know.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
You know what? A whole lot more got developed than people realize. And I think we're going to talk about that. And part of it was as a result of HAARP, understanding electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic waves, and how they work. In fact, just a little teaser, in the HAARP patent, they show how the air over a particular area can be disturbed in such a way using electromagnetic fields where aircraft, missiles will lose their lift and just fall out of the sky. And that's a proven fact. That's fact. Don't take my word for it. Go online, type in HAARP project, HAARP, and read some of this. And that's what we kind of learned. We were learning from the Star Wars project. So there's a lot more to that than people know. We're going to talk about it.
Well, yeah, it's, you know, over the years I've worked on many different projects when I was in manufacturing, and it's amazing the technology, how it advanced from years back.
And there's stuff, and we've talked about this, and I said there's certain things that I won't go into, especially in my field with cybersecurity and some of the cyber stuff. But all I can say is people have no idea how advanced and sophisticated some of this technology really is. Oh, and one of my friends, Phil, the Navy, the former Navy captain who I spoke to and we discussed in the book, he said, Rick, anything you can imagine, we're probably 50 years beyond that in secret. Things that you can't possibly know. And you know, just maybe this is another teaser. I don't want another teaser, but you know, once I start talking about this stuff, we talk about the U.S. space project. Well, at one point, I think we should have that little discussion. I love having it about Apollo 13 and how, according to some of these men, there are reports out there that say Apollo 13 was not an accident. And it's not an alien thing, but Apollo 13 was not an accident, but it has something to do with that whole thing. So we'll talk about that.
Your imagination with this subject could go wild, let me tell you.
It can, and I think, you know, and I can be the worst one on that, so I always try to come back, and we've talked about this, to some of our own science. And again, if we're doing it today, what will we do in 100 years? What will we do in 200 years? And I think the other thing, maybe this is a good time to present this, because we're talking about what this program is going to be about, is I want to level set this, okay? I want, when people listen to us, the first thing we need to do is dismiss the Hollywood version of aliens.
Absolutely.
That is not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about is a civilization very much like ourselves, all right? In the way they look, and the way they operate. You can even see some of their technology seems to parallel us. But a civilization that, according to certain reports by the government, is very much advanced from us. So all we're saying is look at ourselves in 100 years, in 50 years. What are we going to be doing, and is it possible? That's all I'm asking people to do. You don't have to believe us, but just say, hey, does this kind of make sense? Could we be doing this? And we'll talk about some of the project that the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency is doing. We'll talk about some of the project NASA is doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you tell me, what will these be in 100 years?
You're going to hear us say some saying that you may scratch your head, but they'll make sense eventually. The grays, I like to call them.
The grays are going to be a great discussion. I take a lot of heat on that, but when we actually talk about the grays and what they actually might be, I think it's going to make a lot of sense.
It will make sense.
And it was interesting because I was on another radio show in the afternoon, and that was a host that he wanted to hear about this from me because his friends always talked about it. And I started to mention that, and he goes, whoa, wait a minute. And then I mentioned to him a thing called the DARPA Engineered Living Materials Project. And I guess while I was talking, his engineer looked it up. He goes, whoa, stop.
Oh.
He goes, this is all stuff, you're being very credible now. This is making sense. We're actually doing that stuff. We're creating materials out of living matter. And he said, that really is getting spooky now. He goes, okay, what you're saying, the possibilities are starting to get more and more real. And again, we'll talk about all of this. We'll get through it. But you can see right now, we just keep going on and on.
Absolutely.
I can keep going for
hours. And I want the viewers to know, we are going to start episode 1 with going back to the Roswell incident, which I think kind of opened up a lot of eyes over the years and is maybe the most controversial event with the UFOs. Do you agree?
I agree. The 1947 Roswell crash in the desert in Roswell, New Mexico probably signifies the beginning of what we call the modern era of the UFO phenomenon. And for people not familiar with that, the Roswell incident was apparently in 1947. Something crashed in the desert in Roswell, New Mexico. The local Air Force base, or at that time Army Airfield, was called, and they investigated, and they announced, and it was in the newspapers, that they had recovered a crashed UFO, a crashed flying disc. And that went around the world at lightning speed, only to be
very next day.
Very next day, they rescinded that and said, "Oh no, we didn't. It was a weather balloon." And we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we're going to talk about the players who were involved. And there's been a lot of stories about Roswell. I mean, the GAO, General Accounting Office in the Air Force, came out with a report in 1997, I believe. You can check me on those dates. And they said what it was, and other people have said different things. And people have said things, but what we're going to do with Roswell is we're going to focus on the questions that weren't answered and have never been answered. And we're going to present some information, and we're going to let the viewers can decide how can this be, especially when we talk about some of the players involved. Major Jesse Marcel, Colonel Butch Blanchard. These were people, and for people who don't know, the base at the time, Roswell Army Airfield, was home of the 509th Bombardment Squadron. They were the ones who bombed Nagasaki and Iwo Jima. They were the only nuclear force in the world at the time. So it should only, it should only be fact that the people on this base and running this operation should be pretty sharp at what they were doing.
Oh, you would think so.
So we're going to question that. We're going to talk about that.
Without a doubt, that was the first incident that really caught everybody's attention.
What a lot of people don't know, and we can talk about this a little bit when we get into Roswell, is Roswell's not the military's first experience with UFOs.
Oh, absolutely.
In fact, they had a lot of UFO activity over Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what to do about it because they didn't know what it was. And the fascinating thing is they called in the Navy. It was Navy aviation to come in, and they were looking into this to see what the heck it is over the skies of Los Alamos. And we can talk about what they decided and where they went from
We'll certainly get into it. I want to remind everybody that we are going to have an email address, theviewshow@aol.com. We want to hear your feedback and what you think about the show and what questions you want us to address. We will answer as best we can. We're going to either send you back directly an answer, or we may introduce some of the questions during the show. Because in reality, our goal here with this show is eventually to go to a live show where we will take incoming calls to talk about this fascinating subject.
Yeah, and we've talked about this. We just enjoy talking about this. And my goal on this is I'm going to tell you the truth as I believe it's been told to me, and the truth as I know it based on things that I've seen. If people believe it, great. If you don't believe it, that's okay too. I can understand that. But I'm going to tell you the truth whether we agree or whether we disagree, which means that we're going to get to some topics about certain UFO incidences that have been long held truths, and I might say, you know what, that didn't happen like that, or that's not real. And people may not like it, but we have to say, we have to have the integrity to say, even though we love this stuff, let's say, that when we find something that now we know is not right, we have to say it's not. It was nothing. Even though at the time it was very compelling.
We have to realize that some of these things were just beyond the truth,
Right.
There's certain abductions that are a good example where when they came to a fact, they did not happen.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about that.
Absolutely.
Okay, and people shouldn't get excited because I know some people are really into abductions. We're gonna talk a little bit about abductions, why they're difficult. I've been involved in many studies, but we're gonna talk about them and what makes sense and what doesn't, and maybe they'll understand what we're getting at.
Absolutely. We do have some interesting material here in front of us, but I don't want to get ahead of myself because this is going to be part of our episode 1 where we're going to cover the Roswell incident. And believe me, you are in for a treat when you hear what really has gone on with this subject.
Yeah, we have some stuff here, and again, we're going to get into it. And for nothing less, people have heard so much about weather balloons. Well, here we go. We have a weather balloon. So we'll be able to talk about, this is a very real weather balloon from the period. It's not inflated, obviously. If we inflate it, it's going to be about this big. But maybe for fun, we'll do that at one.
Well,
we have that and
you
a
never
bunch
know.
of other things here.
You never know what we're going to get into, Rick.
And we have some other stuff here that I think people are going to recognize.
Yep.
And we're going to all discuss it in regards to Roswell. And then people are going to be able to make a decision based on the question. So what do you think?
Absolutely.
Could this have happened?
We are going to leave it up to you after you see the facts, what you really think about what went on back in the day.
1947.
Right? That's right. I want to thank everybody for watching today, and we hope to get you back in our next episode. And I want to thank our expert cameraman, Bill Bajak, who has been with us quite a while, and I'm sure he found this kind of a new subject that we have never covered before very interesting.
Yeah, I hope so. And he keeps smiling. I'm not sure what that means, if that's good or he's saying, these guys are nuts, I got to get out of here. But he's doing a great job.
Very
he's
good.
Tolerating us.
Very good. Hopefully we'll have Steve with us for episode 1, and I can't wait to get back into the subject.
All right.
Thank you for viewing. We want to thank Nutmeg TV for all their help and support for making this show possible, and our crew with cameraman Bill Majak and, of course, the host of the show. This program is brought to you in part by Salcal Real Estate Connections.